my favorite color. Totally my favorite color. I painted my living room pink, and when my father was alive, he came in and he's like, "Your living room is pink." And I said, "My mortgage, my living room." It's all good. But really, I mean, I think, you know, I've been a bishop for 17 years, which is just such a blessing. I was the 14th woman consecrated a bishop in the Episcopal Church in Tech, and probably like 26 or something in the Anglican Communion. My first Lambeth, there was just a handful of us that were there. The second Lambeth that women had attended. And I had the privilege of attending Barbara Harris's consecration in 1990, 89, whenever that was. I was still in seminary, but to see the first woman bishop consecrated in the Anglican Communion was extraordinary to be present.
Where was that?
It was at the Heinz Auditorium in Boston, Massachusetts. She was elected suffragan to serve in Massachusetts.
1990.
It's like 1990, yeah, it was 1990, 1989. Might have been 89, because it was right after Lambeth 88. Because Lambeth 88 opened the door for that to be a possibility. So it seemed, I think it was in 89 that it happened.
I was noticing in our registers that Bishop Harris was here as a confirming bishop.
Neat.
And there was a whole like 24 people who got confirmed.
Yeah.
Those were the years when St. Paul's was having a lot of folks come from the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes.
Really, there was this huge flood in. One of our kind of growing moments. But to picture Bishop Harris here with 24 confirmands, or people being received.
Yeah, on this rock.
Yeah.
This rock. Yeah.
You know, I only recently returned to the church, and I didn't grow up in the Episcopal community, but as I was mulling over which denominations to return to, one of the reasons why I wanted to give the Episcopalians a shot, and I knew nothing about them except for some superficial thing, was the ordination of women. It was, and yeah, and that was several months ago, and I had a list, and once I came here for the first time, I realized I didn't.
I love it. There is, in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, there is, on one of the pillars, there's a brass plaque commemorating the Philadelphia 11, the first 11 women that were ordained priests in the Episcopal Church. And it's this amazing icon, and I think, I'm trying to remember because I haven't been back to the cathedral in a long time, but if I recall right, it may not have been the 11, it may have been a group that presented them before a bishop before then and were not ordained, but it seems to me it was the 11, but that moment, it's like a moment of pilgrimage to go to that plaque, because they were irregularly ordained, and you know there was lots of conflict in the church about their ordination, and then following that with the Washington Four, but then the floodgates just opened.
Just as a follow-up to that, we are working on a screening. There's been a documentary made about the Philadelphia 11.
Yes.
Screening that will be shown in this area.
Excellent.
It could be shown at St. Paul's if we
really exciting
Yeah.
to do that. So I'm actually, I know someone who's the daughter-in-law of the retired bishop, Corrigan,
Oh, wow.
who ordained the
Yes.
Philadelphia 11. So I'm excited to work forward on that. And the documentary, I guess, is going to be released sooner than they thought. They've got the funding for this. Sooner than last time. So I think maybe the end of this year, definitely in 2024.
Outstanding.
So I'm very excited.
Yay, and thank you for your role in supporting it.
Well, and watching the
promoting it.
trailer, I had to do something about it because it's just something I think that all of us should be aware of and exposed to. That it was a struggle, and we've come a long way.
Yeah, in our lifetime. You know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Were you gonna
So there was an event last night, I think at the cathedral,
Is
St.
that
John
right?
the Divine, yeah.
Yeah.
Friends were posting all over Facebook, having been with the group that's launching some part of the documentary publicly last night, so it's coming soon. Yeah,
To a
exactly.
church near you? I love it.
Indeed.
Outstanding.
Let me know when you do something, we'll publish it.
The newsletter.
I just want to put a plug in for St. Paul's because
Good.
one of the things, reason why I feel comfortable here is the balance between the feminine and the masculine. There's a lot of feminine energy in the church. And when we were in the process of finding a new rector, there were all women up at the altar, keeping us going. But there's a feeling of just, I feel that you need that balance. You need that feminine energy and the masculine energy, and I feel it here, and it's really comforting.
Yeah.
And I really, this is my home for the church because of that.
I'm so glad.
Yeah,
Yeah, what a shout out to St. Paul's.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
And I will add to that, not the female energy, but the fact that the first time I came in this church, Kelly Brown Douglas
Oh.
spoke, and she blew me away. And
Yes.
she was up at the pulpit, and I was 2 rows behind. And she looked at me, and she looked at this white congregation, predominantly white, and said, "How many of you talk about race?"
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, whoa, how many times do, and no, I'm sorry, she said, how many white people talk about race?
Yep.
She said, because black people talk about race all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what brought me in, and at that time, the Race and Social Justice Coalition was beginning. So that's helping to keep me here because of the inclusive equity
Yep.
that the church, this church, and your presiding bishop blows me away. I mean, when he speaks, I want to get up and just say, yeah, hallelujah.
Amen.
So things have changed. So at any rate, I'm just adding that March and I have different reasons, but very similar reasons as well.
Yeah. And I think we as a church are coming to a deeper understanding of the expansive love of God's heart that He's calling us to be into, that God is calling us to be a part of. So, yay church for starting to catch up a little tiny bit. And I think we're all going to get to heaven and go, oh. Didn't even think of that one. You had a question.
Yeah, like Stephen, I'm a new Episcopalian, although a lifelong Christian. And this is the first church I've been a part of, the first tradition that I've been a part of where apostolic succession is a thing. And I'm familiar with the Roman Catholic understanding of that.
Yeah.
And what the ramifications are for the priest acting in the person of Christ and all of that.
Yeah.
But could you help me understand a little more what the Anglican understanding is of apostolic succession?
Absolutely. It's such a fun thing. I'm a believer in it, and we die in this ditch. It's funny in the Episcopal Church. There's 2 successions that we track that we get really excited about. One is what is our succession from Samuel Seabury. And so this is a big deal when you're consecrated and elected. When you're elected and consecrated and become a member of the House, you're given a number, and that number is the number of bishop you are from Samuel Seabury. And until Frank Griswold was presiding bishop, the bishops would sit in their number so that, like Bishop 700 was in the front row and Bishop, 1000 was in the back row. And they would sit by rows and, none of this table stuff, they would just sit by rows and do this thing. And you know, gradually people around you, you know, you move next to different people, sort of like you do in the alumni notes, you know? You get like closer to the front, you know, you're like, things start to change. So my number from Samuel Seabury is 1018. So it's a big deal, a coffee mug with on it. And the bishops in the house who were in the house the year before I joined all got baseball hats with their numbers on it. But Jim Curry would wear his and I'd be like, oh! But now Bishop Jeff, so I'm 1018, and Bishop Jeff is 1160. So lots of bishops have come into the house, you know, since I was consecrated and since Jeff has been. So, and like the fact that I know that about Jeff, I mean, like we all know each other's numbers. So stupid. And important, I have to cover the hat. So from Samuel Seabury, I mean, from St. Peter, and this is where we fall down in our ecumenical conversations, in terms of any kind of merger or thing like that, is because we very strongly believe that we stand as bishops, that we stand in a line that's had bishops lay hands on us, who had bishops lay hands on them, who had bishops lay hands on them, who had bishops lay hands on them, all the way back to the succession of St. Peter. So that, you know, on this rock, Jesus says, I'll build my church. So we believe that the bishops who laid their hands on my head received that touch all the way back to our Lord in his earthly life. And why we are sort of hold on to that is because we're passionate about holding on to that in the Reformation. Because when we elected in the United States, well, it is now the United States, Samuel Seabury, we sent him over to England and said, you go get bishops that have had, you know, the St. Peter Jesus thing going on. You go over there and get that done. Samuel Seabury goes over to England. He's like, pick me. And they're like, that tea thing? Like, we're like, no. And he's like, huh, all right. Now what do I do? Do I go home? Nah, I don't want to go home. So he goes north to Scotland. And he says, where the bishops there had their hands laid on them by English bishops. And he says, pick me. And they say, as long as you take back our prayer book, we will lay hands on your head. And we're happy to kind of tick off England. So, you know, they lay hands on him in Aberdeen, Scotland, then to the holy site where tradition says it happened. And then he came home, so now he has apostolic succession. Now you need 3 bishops in apostolic succession to like hold on to that apostolic succession for some like magical reason. So then we have William White, and then we have, I forget his name, whoever. I can't recall. So now we have 3. So now we can make bishops in the United States, we make priests, what is now the United States, make priests in the United States because we have all these bishops. So we were very clear to hold on to that line. The other churches that, for example, have bishops like the Methodist Church, we weren't as purist about that. They were just like, you want to be a bishop? Yeah, okay. You know, they were more strict than that. But it was not we have to be so particular about this thing. So some people say that we can have merger conversations in terms of like combining perhaps with another church because they hold on to what's called the historic episcopate, which is that they've historically had bishops. So they've historically had bishops, we've historically had bishops. So there we all have bishops. And yet, because we believe that we have that magic, if you will, of apostolic succession, that's where we're like, so we have that. So we get kind of funny about that. That's my take. I mean, there's probably some historian out there that's going, what is she talking about? But that's always been the narrative that I've held on to.
Okay. So you would understand it, that like the ramifications of that having more to do with possible mergers with other denominations than the role of priest.
That's interesting. I would say we get caught in our conversations with with other denominations there. So that's sort of a place where it starts to become a thing, where it's like, oh, well, you all have that. In terms of the definitions of priesthood or diaconate or bishop, I think that's more contextual and where it sort of emerged historically. I think the role of bishops is different in different dioceses that are held in the Anglican community, for example. So I think that's more how things have evolved within the context. Like I believe, for example, I believe that when the bishop lays hands on you, whether you're ordained a deacon or a priest or bishop, I believe that you go through what's called an ontological change. There's something within you that changes because you've taken on this order. There are lots of people, Ian Douglas and I would joke about this all the time. Ian did not believe in the ontological change. His only understanding of ontological change, or his only acceptance of ontological change, was at baptism. So he'd be like, oh, I've had the ontological change, and be like, I've had 4. So, at the end of the day, we're both going to get to the pearly gates, and Peter's going to be like, seriously, this is how you spend your time? So I think that's probably more a little bit of how I don't know if you feel about it.
Well, no, I do, and I don't know how you feel about this.
Go for it.
We've not talked about it.
Go for it. I think for my ideas, I'd love to hear yours.
Well, and I think for me, there's something important about the apostolic succession in the sense that as each of us are confirmed or received, and that bishop is then laying hands on us, we're part of that as well, albeit not in the same capacity. But but I think that's actually really, and I've seen that. I served recently under a bishop who was really, every time he would confirm someone, he would tell mostly teenagers, that this goes all the way back to, and just to your point of that change in the understanding of what you're suddenly taking on and affirming, these kids would just about fall to pieces, realizing that that's millennia old in Christ himself. And so I think that for me is really important and significant. I don't know where I stand officially on what that does for mergers and bringing back the church to universal, and also we're nowhere near that, so I don't think it's going to matter in my lifetime.
Nice.
I'd love it too, but I don't think we're there yet. So.
Nice. Wonderful.
there.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify something. When you say that number 1018,
Yeah.
is that's not all of the United States? Is that just Connecticut? Or
No, that's all of the United States.
That's all of the United States. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, no, Arnold.
Yeah. Okay.
So how often do you identify yourself with numbers that you get, I'm 1018, I'm 1520, and I'm not as important? Do you communicate with one another about your ranking? It sounds like a hierarchical thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But you're not implying that.
No, it's more, it's like
It's
how
just-
they do roll call at House of
It's
Bishops
the roll
meetings.
call.
Yeah.
Okay.
They'll say, Ahrens, Connecticut, and then, that's a cue to Jeff that, in 140, they're gonna call his name.
I find it's interesting that it's not by degree of separation. It's not, I'm number 1 right from Seabury versus I'm number whatever from Hobart, or,
Right, yeah, everybody.
Yeah, it's not a family tree exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because Seabury, of course, consecrated to serve in Connecticut, but became the first bishop in all of Taft.
Right.
Yeah. That's fun. Silly.
How the tree goes.
Very silly.
They were Kevin Bacon, I don't know, something about degrees of separation.
Brilliant.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm new to the Episcopal Church.
Great,
So,
welcome.
I had a question regarding the Book of Common Prayer.
Excellent.
What is it and what is its role for daily use? I see things on YouTube, people and I just kind of.
Good question.
It's a great question. The Book of Common Prayer, so as I alluded to about Samuel Seabury, a lot of our prayer book has its echoes in the prayer book of the Scottish Church. which of course had its echoes from, you know, the Book of Common, whatever they call the Common Prayer in England, but we really sort of pulled directly from Scotland. It's gone through a number of revisions, probably about every 50 years it goes through revisions. I grew up with what's called the 1928 prayer book, and that was in the pews, and we used that. And then when I was in high school, the Episcopal Church started exploring, let's have a new prayer book. So they did a bunch of experimental rites. Some of you may remember this, we had the zebra book for a while, we had the green book for a while, and those were for trial use. And then eventually the revision that became the 1979 prayer book was accepted at our governing choosing body, which is the General Convention, which meets every 3 years, with delegates from every diocese in Tech in the Episcopal Church, and active bishops in Tech, and actually retired bishops have a vote in the General Convention. So in '79, the General Convention voted to have this our new prayer book. There's lots of conversations now about should we modify it for a new generation? Will it even be a book? Will it be online? What will it be? But none of those are resolved at this point. The book, it's funny, if you open up the Book of Common Prayer in any church, you're going to find it's going to open to page 355, because those are the brown pages of Rite 2 that, you know, every Sunday they've been faithfully prayed with. There is such a richness in the Book of Common Prayer. It's one of those books that I always say, you know, take it on an airplane or take it anywhere and just play with it, because you're going to find a treasure in it. There's daily devotions, so there's a page that's prayers for in the morning, at noon, and in the evening. There's morning prayer, shows up in 2 different ways. There's Rite 1, the old language, these and nows. Rite 2, the more contemporary language, if you will, 79. Still, you know, obviously would make some changes now. But then there's Compline, to say at night. That's on like $2.99 or something. You can find Compline, which is a great nighttime prayers. There's evening prayers, Rite 1 and Rite 2. And then when I was a kid, this is when this magic opened up for me. When I was a kid, I grew up in Massachusetts, which was very low church as a diocese, which meant we read morning prayer twice a month, and then twice a month we had Eucharist. And I would sit in the which meant that in morning prayer, we'd do that on Sunday. The priest would then read, say, maybe 7 prayers from the Book of Common Prayer in that time for deep prayer. And we sometimes call them collects, collecting the theme, whatever it is. The collect of the day collects the theme of the day, collect for peace, a theme around peace. And what I would do is I would sit in the pew, and the priest would start the prayer, and I would race to see if I could find it before he was done. So I'd be like, all right, it started with Almighty God, and it was about peace, and I'd be like frantically, like going through the prayer book, and I'd be like, there it is, there. And my mother would be looking like, prayer book calisthenics. You know, I was like 10. I mean, I was such a. But just the prayers. I mean, there's prayers for the human family. There's prayers for social justice. There's prayers for any occasion. There's a list of thanksgivings in the back of the book. They're just extraordinary. You know, we say the general Thanksgiving in Sunday church, but there's so many that are there that are just rich. The litany of penance that we say on Ash Wednesday, and I don't know about you, but every time we say it on Ash Wednesday, I'm like, I should pray this every day. This is really good. And then you can just like, you know, piece that out. The other thing that's in there that's incredibly rich, besides the Psalms, which are beautiful, are the canticles. You know, and again, growing up in morning prayer, I grew up with the canticles. We lose them sometimes in Eucharistic traditions. The canticles are just, I mean, just go play with it. Just take it on an airplane, and then the flight's going to be delayed, and you're like, there I go. Look at this. And you and Jesus are going to have like a field day with it. You know, I get anxious when we talk about, I'm old, but I get anxious when we talk about putting the prayer book online or making, you know, sort of insert revisions here. I had the privilege 30 years ago of hearing Terry Waite speak after his time in captivity. And he talked about one of the things that kept him sane during his time of captivity, isolation, was recreating the prayer book in his mind. Because he said it was an intellectual exercise, it was also a prayerful one. And I've been so moved by that, so I can remember where I was in the library at Yale Divinity School, and remember where I was standing when he said it. And then I just remember thinking, I would have probably gone crazy, but I would have been like, what's the next one? But I love that it was like intellectually, but also like you and Jesus were doing it smart. I don't know if you have other comments about the BC.
Well, here to tap into my nerdiness, yeah.
Go for it.
No, I think, and I mean, everything that you've said, and as you know, I'm getting on a plane in a couple weeks.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
know, it's like, I have
Great.
it on my phone.
Right.
I prefer the printed book. No, I think the other piece of that, I mean, all of that, and yes, the richness, and I never remember what percentage of it, it's ridiculously high, is actually scripture. So like the
Gazillions.
idea that, you know, it's the scriptures in a form that we can use and recognize and pray with every day without just like randomly opening the Bible to see what, you know, jumps off the page. But also, and especially now that you've shared that about the concept of praying those prayers over time and space, right? With everybody who came before and everybody who will come after. And, you know, I have a cross I normally wear that's stamped out of an Ethiopian coin that's 200 years old, right? And it's smoothed out because some people have prayed with it so many times. And so I feel the same way about the prayer book, right? That revisions being whatever they are and language changing, the general concepts and prayers and yearnings of so many centuries of Christians, Anglican Christians, they're all in there, right? And we're doing that along with them and leaving that for the next. So yeah, I just think my nerdiness, and I think I'm a mystic at heart, I'll admit that. So there you go.
Don't disagree with that.
I disagree with that. I'm sure you don't at this point in time. So, yeah. Yeah. So, I just feel
Questions?
I'll ask another question. If you could help me understand a diocese with more than one bishop.
Sure.
And does every diocese have more than one bishop, or just some? Do some have three?
Great question.
Or
Yeah, super question. So, pretty much what drives the number of bishops is a canonical requirement, which is that in the canons, which is kind of our rule book, they're also great to take on airplanes if you were like a real church member. But in the canons, it says that every parish in the diocese will get a visitation from a bishop every 3 years. So that will drive the number of bishops typically, because how does that happen? You know, in a diocese like, you know, smaller dioceses that maybe have 40 parishes as part of the diocese, which is pretty typical, sort of between like 30 and 70 is a pretty typical number, maybe 30 and 90. A bishop can do that. You know, go every Sunday, and in 2 years, 3 years, the bishop will get all those visitations done. But in a diocese like Connecticut, where we have 153 parishes, it's not physically possible. So that's really what drives the number more than anything else. It used to be that for every 50 parishes there'd be another bishop, is kind of what people were kind of tracking along. That's become less true as bishops have been much more embracing, thank God, of the realities of, you know, we have certain ministries, and a lot of our ministries is about empowering and serving others. So a lot of that quote work of the bishop has been, we actually didn't need to be doing that. There are people who can be empowered to do that, particularly in congregations where you're kind of, you know, right there with people in the Mohawk community. So the dioceses that tend to have more than one bishop are the larger dioceses. So Massachusetts, Connecticut, Texas, New York, California, a lot of those have multiple bishops, whereas Vermont, Western Massachusetts, Delaware, Rhode Island, just have one bishop. And then there are different kinds of assisting bishops. There's what I am, a suffragan, coming from the word suffrage, same word as suffragette. I was elected by vote, so I serve at the diocese's pleasure. So technically, I don't work for Bishop Jeff, because I was elected and serve at the pleasure of convention. An assisting bishop, but also very clear that, some bishops pick what's called an assisting bishop, and an assisting bishop is a bishop that's already a bishop, that the bishop diocesan will say, I need some help, it'd be great if you could come help me. But you don't get consecrated to come do that, because you're just asked by the bishop to do that. Whereas for me, as elected by the diocese, Drew Smith, who was diocesan when I was elected, didn't have any real say in who was going to be a suffragan, so he just ended up with the extensive convention picked. He may have had say along the way of like, this is a short list that I could work with, but I don't know those dynamics. And then when Ian was elected, I was his sitting suffragan, as was Jim Curry. Jim retired. And then when Jeff was elected, I was his sitting suffragan. So.
I would also just do a time check.
Yeah.
How much time do you, it's just past 15 till, so
All right,
14 minutes.
Another question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Great,
have a
sure.
question. Could you talk a little bit about the role of the canons in the diocese? I noticed that there are several.
Yeah.
And could you just talk a little bit about
What a
the role?
great, yeah. So canons is an interesting word. It's spelled with one N, so that, spell check is gonna tell you, like, what are you doing? You're like, I don't want that kind of canon. So there's two kinds of canons that we talk about in the Episcopal Church. One is canons as in our rule books, so that like the rules that we follow are found in our canons, and the diocese has canons, and Tech has canons. But then there are people who are canons. And there's a bunch of different ways you get to be a canon. Like our cathedral has canons, who are just, special people that the diocese has chosen to recognize in that way, by calling the canon of the cathedral. Rebecca Hatch, for example, sits in that position. But then we have staff persons who are basically, it's kind of the senior staff, the way it's been. This is the way Ian kind of interpreted it, and Jeff was living into it, is that the senior staff, so there's bishops and then there's canons, and that becomes the senior staff. And then with Bishop Ian, he was like, how do I want to deploy or use senior staff? So he said the things that are important to my episcopate are finance and administration. So our Canon Rosado is our canon for finance and administration. And then another thing that Bishop Ian thought was really important was a canon for mission advancement and coaching. And maybe it's not the best title, but that's coaching in the sense that Canon Hodap works with clergy in particular and helping them kind of navigate life in parish ministry in particular. But also the idea of advancement being what help do congregations need to live into their best selves and the selves that God is calling them to be. And then there was a canon for communications, was the person who basically put out our newsletters. If there was something that came up, was helped us with messaging to the public. And then we just sort of support us in our website design and other things like that. And then we have something that convention actually said would think was a great idea, and Bishop Ian agreed, so we created the position, a canon for racial justice and advocacy, which was served until today by Canon Runjit Matthews, who helped us do our work around what is the expansive love of God and how do we witness to it, particularly recognizing our role in white supremacy. So Bishop Jeff has come in and said, well, some of those things work for me and some of those don't. Like, he still wants a canon for finance and administration. He still wants a canon for communication, so we're moving towards calling somebody to that position. He said he wanted what's called a canon to the ordinary. Jeff, as Bishop Diocesan, is also called the ordinary, for some reason in the church. And so Runjit is kind of his right-hand person. And as of today, Runget becomes that person who's canon to the ordinary. Bishop Smith, Drew Smith, also had a canon to the ordinary, but when Ian was diocesan, he chose not to have one. So it's going back to an old model. And the person who's now our canon for racial justice and advocacy is an interim position named in person of Canon Harlan Dalton. And he'll serve that position until we hire somebody for that position going forward, but he's willing to step in. Because we didn't want to leave that position vacant while we searched. The work is too important. So with Jeff, we'll have a canon to the ordinary, a canon for racial justice and advocacy, a canon to the ordinary, and then sort of exploring what is the role of canon for coaching and advancement, and are there better titles that help people know what people do? Great question. Yeah, because it's very confusing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very confusing. I don't know if that's.
It's
what
very
I added.
confusing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, even Bishop Jeff was saying yesterday in a meeting, it was kind of like, who do I call? And we're like, sometimes I don't even know who to call. I'm like, I don't know, I'll CC everybody and somebody will get it. So we're working on our own internal clarity as well, particularly through all the transition we've been through, and then also exploring, how we communicate that more clearly to people in the pews, because we exist to serve you. So if you don't know what we're all doing, we're not really serving you as clearly as we could be. It's a great question. All right.
Great questions all. Let's
All
go pray.
brilliant. All right. I think it's time for church.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all. See
Thank you all.
soon.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.